Electronics and Information Technology. His research interest includes development of high performance organic FET, sensors, RRM devices for flexible electronics. He has published about 100 research articles, including more than 15 in peer-reviewed journals of high repute, such as Organic Electronics, ACS Applied Materials and Interfaces, Applied Physics, Letters, and IEEE Transactional Electronic Devices. At IIT Jodhpur, he leads the flexible large area microelectronics flame research group with focus towards demonstration of flexible devices and system for eventual biodegradability and green electronics. We welcome you, sir, in this program. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Professor Sumit Kale. So thanks for giving me opportunity to speak to the audience, which is mostly like researchers and teachers, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let me share my slide.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so
Sachin.
probably in Google this full screen mode doesn't work. So let me check. You just tell me whether I go to the second slide and if it is correct. So right now is first slide showing?
Plus it's showing, sir, but it's not in full screen. Not in full screen.
Sir, you can just click on the slideshow. Just click on slideshow.
Okay. Yeah. That's so. Let me. So is it full screen now?
No, sir.
Okay, so this is the problem actually with Google.
Sir, just click on slideshow.
Yeah.
Click on slideshow once.
Yeah, I have done. Okay.
So just right next to the animation, there is a option of slideshow. Just click on that once.
This one start.
Right to the animations on the horizontal tab, you can see.
Okay. So you're saying this slideshow and from beginning or from.
No, sir. Go to setup slideshow. Setup slideshow. In this, there is an option of setup slideshow.
Yeah. I'm there.
Just click it once.
Okay.
Click on browse by an individual windows. Second option. Yeah. Browse by an individual window. Click OK.
Okay.
Now you can present, sir.
Very good. So who is this? Who helped me?
Sachin, sir. Yeah.
Sachin, very good. I think so. Last week also, I think these talks have been frequent, but nobody helped me to kind of solve this. So let us see if this works. Your suggestions. So is it in full screen now?
Sir, now you can click F5.
So I went to the full screen.
Yes, sir.
Now it's full.
So just please check if it goes to the second slide. Yeah, has it gone to the second slide?
Yes, sir. I can see the transition.
Okay, very good. So let us start now. So as already mentioned, I'll be talking about flexible electronics, and mostly the devices one speaks. As an electronics person, you talk about transistors and which are circuitry. And then for storage, you have memory. And sometimes you also call about sensors, which are smarter components. Okay. And then all the amplifiers, ADC, and everything comes. But the topic is more or less focused on transistors and a bit of memory. And these are the kind of overview are the topics which I'll briefly cover in this maybe next couple of hours. So. But any talk should not be started without again refreshing what has been happening. And many of you might have already seen and known. But then whenever we talk about transistor, we always see when was this first transistor invented. Many of you might know that it was around the same time when India became independent. It is in 1947. And the people who were kind of involved in this are these three gentlemen, and obviously these kind of great discoveries or inventions will lead to Nobel Prize and this kind of prestigious awards. So these are the three gentlemen who were involved in making this point contact transistor, which was made by germanium. And obviously transistor means you had have three electrodes, where one will be control and other two will be kind of current flowing in the current flowing path. So this was done in 1948. This image you see, they were characterizing. But how did this integrated circuit come into picture? An integrated circuit, when you integrate more than one or two, three components at least, and you see this J.S. Kilby was involved in making one integrated circuit. And right now, this in current days, if you see this looks very ugly kind of setup. But that time it was again exciting invention where some components were somehow integrated together. And this was done in 1958. And these were done by companies like Kilby was at Texas Instrument, and you all heard what is TI. And then Fairchild Semiconductor, also mostly Pune based, this right now the kind of, so this is also an analog company, a semiconductor company. So the people who were involved, again later they got Nobel Prize in 2000. So this is something which has changed how we see the things happening around us, and the smartness was evolved because of all these electronics and these transistors and these smart devices, which led to the life which we live today because of all these inventions. Obviously, before that, computers were there and everything was there, but they were actually very huge, and this made things much smaller. So all the evolution was, obviously you always try to, and people try to see what is the trend, how this industry moving. And Gordon Moore just observed this, and he made a prediction. And the prediction was that every technology generation, the technology will double its effectiveness. Now, double its effectiveness, the people who took the meaning is like double the number of transistors. Now, doubling number of transistor means either you shrink the chip size, increase the chip size, or shrink the transistor sizes, and both were done together. And this technology node was something like 18 to 24 months. So technology generation, each technology generation was 18 to 24 months, and things were changing in every time. But this all started after 1960. Before 1960, when it was more like bipolar transistor and germanium. And then MOSFET was not actually, didn't come into picture until people got MOS structure, which is without traps and other thing. That is, oxide was very necessary, and silicon provided this silicon dioxide combination, and that happened in 1960 when people got first MOSFET transistor. And after 1960, this Moore law has come into picture. You see 1974, you see first HP scientific calculator, but before that, 1969, Intel was founded. Then every 2-3 years, and 10 years, you see each time a new chip. So 1972, Intel 8008, where 2.5 thousand transistors were there, and 82 you have Intel 286, then Intel 486 in around 1990. 93 we got Pentium, and then after Pentium we all know Pentium 1, 2, 3, 4, and Core Duo, Core 2 Duo, Duo Core. All those things kept coming, and that is how Intel kept lead in this IC business, and IC is integrated circuit. And there was a time when right at 2000 or between 2000 to 2005, when people started thinking that probably this area will end because now no more shrinking can happen. Devices cannot shrink more. But then this FinFETs came into picture, and then nothing stopped actually. But when this time when people were thinking that nothing, something has to happen, then people were thinking about spintronics, quantum, and other moletronics and all those areas, thinking that scaling limit will come. But then when things went vertical, FinFETs scaling was more possible. So this is how these things evolved. And now we are talking about less than 10 nanometer. CMOS is like 7 nanometer and so on. So this is how things have evolved. But at the core of all this, it was CMOS. And we all know, since the background of all of you have this basic electronics, so you all know why this thing happened. And this thing happened only because of this CMOS structure, which has all the advantages. Obviously, there is very low static power, and there is advantage of rail-to-rail voltage and modular design, and it's very reliable and robust. So it takes care of, because of this complementary nature, it takes care of many issues. And this is a simple, again, taken from a book, which is eventually taken from University of California, Berkeley's one picture. So this is just a simple, not double well, single well structure, just to show. But then CMOS has evolved with years with multi mask and double wall and all the spacers and everything. And so CMOS has evolved, but then in the core, it's one NMOS and one PMOS, and it's very modular. And because of that, it has become choice of industry. But anyway, not going too much into detail of conventional silicon area, I'll just highlight one of the issues which we are facing nowadays. And you see the exponential growth, not only all other areas, but electronics is something where we all, if you just recall last 20 years, take your mobile phone and see how things have evolved. Now, how touch, how smoothness, how performance, frequency, and everything, what kind of connectivity. Other than network connectivity, the phones itself have become so powerful, sometimes they can beat your desktop computers. And all these have happened. And because of that, these technologies have kept changing, and more number of products have started being consumed by consumers. So we have become eventually consumer of electronic products and kept buying. So it is not about desktop and computers, but then TVs, fridges, and multiple washing machines, and so on. So all these at the core, they have electronic component. Now, when you always have new products, what happens? Every 2 years, if you are changing your mobile, many times we don't think what happens to our mobile phone. We keep it for a few years, and then eventually we throw in garbage. Same happens with other electronic products. Obviously, they have lifetime. A fridge may have 15 to 20 years. A TV might have 10 to 15 years. A computer, desktop computer, again, same 5 to 10 years. A laptop. So after these 5 to 10 years, all these become electronic garbage. And many times you call it e-waste. So we all produce e-waste, and this has been increasing exponentially. But then we never think what is happening to, and not the companies who sell, they do not think about this e-waste. And now e-waste becomes responsibility of this public and government agencies how to take care of that. Obviously, cities like Noida and other NCR, you have a lot of landfills where many of the are not so cycled things are filled there, but eventually that causes a lot of pollution to environment. So it means environment doesn't find it very friendly because of we just keep buying and keep using it, and it has to be disposed. And if they are not disposed, they will go to landfill. And it's like if body start accumulating fat, obviously it may get a cardiac arrest. Similarly, the water resources, natural water flows of earth, if you keep filling with rigid products which are not degradable, biodegradable, obviously there will be problems to earth, and that we may see by multiple disturbances. And in rain, you see how cities are choked. But can we, as researchers, can we try to reduce this? As consumers, we might not want, but as researchers, can we think about something which can reduce this effect? And that is where, but then government also, when we say it's responsibility of government, governments also try certain things. So I think till last year, I was even not aware that government already has e-waste initiative, which was first e-waste regulation was there in 2011 and effective in 2012. And then again, amendments and all those things happens, and further developments and all these clean to green awareness campaign. And October 2020, this MIGHTY has also this awareness campaign. So, but then we don't, overall, we don't see all these things, and we don't feel involved in many of these things because, see, many times, see, country like India has so many issues and so everything cannot be done in a proper way. But see, wherever we are as researchers, we can think about what to do. So summary is, can we reduce this effect? What if, so there can be two ways. If you want to reduce something, one thing is simply try to reduce the weight, try to reduce the volume. Okay, that is one way. Second thing is slightly next stage. You think about trying to see what processing temperatures they are, 1 minute. So is it like I came to the first slide? Is this slide visible?
Yes, sir.
It's
Yes,
not in,
it is visible.
it's not in full
Yes,
screen
sir.
mode, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. Now it's okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. See, so the aim is, one thing is the processing temperatures what we use. Obviously, products which are made with silicon, the processing temperatures, individual processes which are used are something like sometimes more than 1000 degrees centigrade. And so a lot of high temperatures are used. So can you think about processes which use much lower temperatures? Many times we talk about rigid things which cause more environment hazard and so on. Can things be flexible? And moreover, if they are biodegradable, all these issues may not even arise. So can they be biodegradable? And combining all those things, this area is more suitable, and which is called organic electronics. Many times you call it flexible electronics, or nowadays we are talking about green or biodegradable electronics. You make products, you make devices, but are those devices which are produced by these newer technologies such as flexible electronics, can they be suitable for intelligent systems? Now, intelligence, now whatever system you're talking about is intelligent. The systems understand you, systems unlock themselves, lock themselves, and adapt to the environment, and that is smartness. On those lines, my research group at IIT Jodhpur, and that is flexible large area microelectronics, that is FLAME. We named it FLAME, just gives light. So it's the various devices we started working on, and you see some pictures. First one was actually in collaboration with this Dr. Hagen Clark, Stuttgart, and second two are from here only, which are transistors and memory devices. But these are essentially from the work of the PhD students which are working in my group. And so this group started working on these aspects, starting with organic transistors. But then if you see how this, and many times this organic or flexible electronics, you say when industry thinks it as more like printed electronics, the electronics which can be printed. When you say conventional silicon takes 1000 degree and more than that for discrete processes, this printed electronics requires, first thing is solution processing, which is much cheaper, and a lot of volume can be produced, and also temperatures could be low. And not only some devices like transistors we are talking about, this technology can produce photovoltaic components, sensors, logic, memory. This can also produce conductors, ink only, which are say used for making RFID antennas and connections and so on. OLED lights can be printed. OLED displays, which are like OLED TV monitors, can be printed. And then there are some materials which can be used for printing this LCD and so on. So how this technology has evolved in last decade, and I'm talking about this 2011 to 2021, and this is more of a prediction done by this IDTech report, where you see how things are evolving, and you can see a significant increase with time in last decade. It's more than kind of 1000% increase is which you see. It means this technology has a potential, and which is, though compared to silicon, you don't see it anywhere, but respect to its initial value, it's growing. If you talk about devices itself, transistors itself, what happens, and transistors, how do you evaluate transistors? So transistors are evaluated by the speed. Okay. And how do you evaluate the speed of a single transistor? Obviously, you want to make at least a basic ring oscillator. And ring oscillator gives a first-hand idea of what could be operating frequency. That is what done. But ring oscillator, a ring oscillator works at 1 volt, somebody 100 volt. So then you have to also normalize by voltage, because how much voltage, what frequency you get at what is the at operating voltage, you normalize it, and then again last 15 years, if you see this plot, this was published in one of the high impact journals. So you see there are 3 colors essentially. One is red, which is devices produced on plastic substrate, and the one which is blue is silicon or glass substrate, which is rigid one. So rigid one is not flexible, but it might be organic only because of some components are organic, which is in this case organic semiconductor, and they all are vacuum evaporated in this case. So you see with time this number increases from 10 to the power minus 4 up to say 10, which is, you see this plot going. But one thing is for sure, this factor, which is voltage normalized frequency, is increasing with time. So that is a good sign. And in between also you see from rigid how things have moved to flexible substrate. Plastic is much better than any rigid one, but then plastic itself may cause environmental pollution. And later people started thinking about why plastic, if we are talking about biodegradability, why not paper? And a good quality paper can be used as substrate. And the green couple of dots, if you see one dot at least here, is green one. And green one where devices on paper were demonstrated with vacuum operated semiconductor. So this is how things are moving. For smart systems, one thinks about 3D printed devices sometimes, not only inkjet printed devices, and then hybrid integration. For example, I said RFID antenna. So antenna can be printed conductor, but this chip of RFID, which can be produced by your conventional technology, but both can be integrated on a flexible substrate. So all those approaches are used, but devices, potential devices of all this technology can be transistors for memory, resistive random access memory, then various kind of sensors, batteries could be printed, RFIDs could be printed, light emitting displays could be printed, and subsystems, if you talk about, it can be electronic skin, robotic skin, smart textile, a cloth which can have all the functionality. Sometimes health monitoring of elderly kids and anything, if you have some system which can be produced. Some patches on skin which can be produced. So these are some subsystems, but overall multiple systems can be produced and integrated as hybrid one. And again, organic electronics, this is overview, what are the devices and why I have highlighted these transistors and circuits, because I am more interested in that. But then what you want actually from these systems, these three pictures are taken from a, again, 2017 paper, where silicon electronics is shown everything is rigid and produced on rigid. But on the next one, if you see, if it is completely flexible and stretchable, how it makes a kind of intimate contact with the skin, and then you can stretch, tilt, whatever, means multiple dimensions you can stretch and shrink, you can do. But to do that, you cannot have conventional straight metal lines as used in silicon. You have to redesign these things, and what you see, this helical are more like curved line structure, where this supports stretchability. So these kind of things need to be done for any skin-like or epidermal electronic system. And there are various other applications. These are some pictures taken from various resources. And then these are some circuits made by this flexible electronics and by IMEC Belgium, which are demonstrated. So all those at demonstration level, but what you feel like system integration is complex. You want to put everything by printing together on this, it's challenging. But at design level, can people also design this? When you think about something which can be produced by flexible electronics, before you actually try to print that circuit, can you also design, simulate? And there are efforts which are supporting this. Obviously, single devices have to be fabricated. And moreover, some ring oscillators have to be fabricated. Why devices? Because devices will give you parameters like mobility and so on, leakage and other things. Ring oscillator will give you more detail like frequency related. If there is parasitic capacitances, those things will come into picture. With both, you can just obtain some compact device model which can be used in circuit simulation. So PDK will be developed. And then this design procedure can be similar to what any conventional CAD designs will be there. Or VLSI tools are there. Those could be used to design, and then so PDK has to come from compact models which are done by actual device measurements. But challenge is these PDKs will not be universal, because any flexible, for silicon, you know that material is silicon. band gap is 1.1, doping is this, that, which can be tuned. But for flexible transistor, when you say organic semiconductor itself is not fixed, each semiconductor will give you a different PDK. Similarly, each dielectric material will give you a different PDK, and so on. So there will be more challenges compared to conventional silicon, where the basic framework, material framework is fixed. So this is not very easy, but doable. There are devices. This is again my first PhD students' work I saw. So there are some good devices which are fabricated. So there are techniques to fabricate very good devices, and so this is one set of device where you see a plastic substrate, a gate, then a gate dielectric which is covered by self-assembled monolayer, which is again for good interface, and then semiconductor is put and source drain is put on the top. Now these are organic transistors or flexible transistors. What you see here in conventional silicon, generally what you do is you dope for making source drain. But in TFTs, you actually put source drain as metal, and you don't have any semiconductor as source drain. So metals are having the metals are used as source drain. Semiconductor is there between source and drain. But then what you find is the source drain will certainly make a Schottky contact or Schottky barrier. So you have to also see this matching with semiconductor. In conventional silicon, you take care of it by doing silicides and other things. There are other devices also, electrolyte gated transistor. Essentially, these three terminals, how do you make it? Like you want source, drain, semiconductor, dielectric, and gate. And depending on the position of this gate, source, drain, these devices are named. Here you see P3ST, poly-3-hexylthiophenol is a semiconductor, some gel is dielectric, PEDOT-PSS is a conducting material, on the top is gate, and so on. But with you see use of various materials like polymers, organic, or amorphous silicon, or polysilicon, or metal oxides, you see there is a delay versus field effect mobility. And what you see here is how polymers have lower field effect mobility and polysilicon has highest field effect mobility. But polysilicon as such is not as flexible as polymers. On the other hand, in between what you see organic and amorphous silicon are neither on extreme any side, but they are more suitable for flexible electronics. Conventional processes, if you just visualize what are conventional processes for any silicon, and I'm side by side I'm trying to discuss so that you correlate. So in conventional silicon process, you start with crystal growth, then epitaxy, diffusion, oxidation, lithography, implantation, then etch away multiple things. You have gate, deposit whatever you want, make device to device connections. It's like you create the transistor with these discrete processes and then package it. This is your mostly these are the processes for making IC manufacturing. On the other hand, any flexible or flexible or printed, you can say electronics, you can have multiple methods of printing. And moreover, I will say patterning. Printing also is a patterning. But the patterning which is done by lithography is you can say subtractive process. Subtractive process means you deposit everything mostly and remove whatever you don't desire. Whereas printing is something which is additive process. Additive process means if you want to make a line, you print that line. Now this plot is resolution versus throughput. So the ones which are patterning processes like lithography, they are very slow. The ones which are kind of more roll-to-roll kind of printing, their resolution is lower, but then output is more. So these are printing are additive processes, and then there are lithography which are subtractive processes. So for flexible electronics, you want to have these additive processes which are printing processes. But there is something called hybrid integration also. In hybrid integration, you can have thin silicon, you can have flexible substrates, and try to integrate some components from here and there and make proper connection. This is called flexible hybrid electronics. What could be printing strategies? So there could be various printing strategies, starting from, see this Diamatics printer, you see that is a 4-sheet kind of printing where some kind of more of device optimization is done. more like a lab scale printer, but then there will be roll-to-roll printing, which are very high throughput. There could be other techniques like more like you have stamp when we put stamp. So there are transfer printing, there are other even printing, you can say inkjet printing, aerosol jet printing, ink filament printing. This jet printing also have multiple methods. But what I'm talking about here is, let us see the possibility of 3D printing. Now 3D printing has been evolving. Excuse me, one minute. Yeah. So, okay. So this 3D printing has been evolving as one of the most promising technologies for this Industry 4.0 era, where everything can be made by this 3D printing, and it's an additive process. Additive process means wastage of material is not there. Now, in flexible electronics, this has become very suitable, where you can stack these devices and you can print source, gate, semiconductor, N-type semiconductor, P-type semiconductor. And recently, I think in 2019, there was a paper in Nature Communication where these circuits were demonstrated. So this poses a good, exciting problem for all this. If you see this application for smart system, this is again a paper by, I think, Ravindra Dahiya, University of Glasgow, where he had shown how this overall scheme of things appear when you see this IoT and mobile healthcare application. How can ultra thin chips be used in this flexible electronics? What are various application areas which are prosthetics, wearables, energy harvesting, some implantables, portable displays, communication modules, and then smart systems. You mostly have sensors, or processing and lighting, power, these kind of. So these are this is overall scheme, but there are other earlier reports where this is one by Arokia Nathan, Professor Arokia Nathan, which he again summarized this very well, where how this nanotechnology materials find their place in this flexible electronic system. So their graphene and silicon, more are nanoparticles, AG nanoparticles, quantum dot, everything, how they have find their place in computation, displays, energy storage, e-textile, and haptics, human interactivity, and so on. So these are summarized by various researchers. But then one of the exciting future systems of interest, obviously not very doable right away, but then sometimes you see this brain imaging, and brain imaging is more like you have to have numbers of electrodes on your brain to actually acquire signals. Now, if you see this picture, this doesn't seem to be very friendly arrangement for any object. Ideally, there could be something where all these electrode arrays are printed in one single sheet of this flexible electronic system. It's like more like a cap, and if that somehow acquires all the signals, and maybe even you don't want a one wire for a person to be sitting near all these wires, there can be a communication module, and all the data can be extracted. Now, this kind of where person is not sitting there near the system, person, he or she is moving around and then still has a communication module. Now, these kind of things, systems, what will they require? Obviously, there will be a M cross N sensor array, depending on if you are you want MN wires to be coming out. So you have a M cross N sensor array. And then you have to have sensor, you have some amplification, ADC, DSP, then memory. And then also some power battery should be there, power management should be there. And there can be some silicon component on there, which can have this CPU and wireless transmitter, and then flexible electronic component, which is more like electrodes and sensing. Now, this whole thing looks very exciting, and it can solve so many things if these kind of products come. So this is one of the future systems of interest. But if you see at basic module level, what are essential components? So essential components, certainly these kind of applications, one sensor will be required. Then the ASIC, application specific integrated circuit, which controls everything. And then memory, which stores, connectivity, which connects to outside, and energy harvesting and battery and power management unit. These are the components. And technology and devices, you talked about thin film transistors, printable sensors, RMs and RFID and so on. Okay. Talking about this organic electronics itself as an area, I'll briefly talk about why organic. Before, you see, 1978 actually, people were thinking that these organic materials are insulators. But then in 1978, Nobel laureate Sir Alan Heger, he found that polyacetylene, which is again alternate double bond and single bond, shows conducting properties. And that is when this area started, and a lot of research has happened. There are other grades who had contributed, like this CW Tang built first OLED and OPV, and known to be father of organic electronics. So it's like many contributions were there, and some of the areas like OLED have already excelled well, and in transistors still a lot of materials, lot of functionalities are being tried. But if you see all these conjugated polymers, which are single and double bond, alternate single and double bond, they can have, by tuning, they can have property of semiconductors, insulator and metals. And one example, which is say polyacetylene itself, shows something like that. But then if I say this organic electronics, what is that? Is it going to replace anything? Certainly not. It's a complementing technology. And then advantages are low cost, flexibility, process simplicity, and low temperature processing. But one can ask, see, polycrystalline silicon is flexible. Why to go for organic? Amorphous silicon is flexible. Why to? But then if you see the process temperatures of polycrystalline silicon, that is something like 600 or more. Though the mobility numbers are higher, but any flexible plastic substrate or even a paper substrate can burn or deform. So that is not very suitable for any flexible electronics. On the other hand, hydrogenated amorphous silicon, that has more flexibility, but again the production temperature is about 300 degrees centigrade, not very suitable for a flexible substrate. And the numbers what you get, which is say 1 centimeter square per volt second, you get from organic semiconductors also. And one of my this student's report had shown that even the semiconductors produced at less than 100 degrees centigrade showed these numbers and perform very well, not only on that aspect, but other aspects also. Okay, so we'll briefly just see some transistor part and have a break. But then if you see the structure of any transistor which is fabricated, as I said, depending on where do you put gate and where do you put source drain, the transistor is named. So A, if you see, the gate is in the bottom of dielectric and semiconductor, so you call it, that structure is bottom gate. And then source and drain are contact are on the top, so that is called top contact. So the first device is named as bottom gate top contact device. Similarly, the second one, B, if you see, top gate bottom contact device. C, if you see, bottom gate bottom contact device. Why bottom gate bottom contact? If the contact is beneath the semiconductor, then you call it bottom contact. If contact is on the top of the semiconductor, you call it top contact. So C is bottom gate bottom contact device, and D is top gate bottom contact device. Okay, so these are four conventional structures. Obviously, one of them you choose depending on suitability, depending on which kind of material, which type of technologies are being used. People choose one of them. Why we choose this top contact? Only because contact resistances are much lower and easier to fabricate. But then depending on which printing technology, which material, any one of these could be used. Okay. And then operation, I will not discuss. Operation is more like the model is taken from silicon related physics. But then one thing you have to see is these devices don't see inversion. There is nothing like crystalline semiconductor. So they work in accumulation. And at contact, which is made between source drain and semiconductor, that is very important. Now, if you see this picture A, B, and C, In semiconductor, you see there are two levels: lowest unoccupied molecular orbital, which is LUMO, and highest occupied molecular orbital, which is HOMO. Now, HOMO is more like valence band of silicon, and LUMO is more like conduction band. Though it is not a band, but it's level. Now, it means LUMO is for electron transport and HOMO is for hole transport. Now, if you want to do a good hole injection, HOMO has to be matching with metal work function. If you want to do a good electron injection, then LUMO has to match with work function of the metal. So this is what you consider, and depending on what voltage you apply. But if that is not matching, there will be a barrier which is called injection barrier, and that is called phi b. Okay, so mostly, or whenever you talk about device performance, if it is NMOS, then electrons are injected from source to semiconductor. If it is PMOS or PFET, then holes are injected from source metal to semiconductor. Now, for electron injection, LUMO has to be lower than what work function of the metal. For hole injection, HOMO has to be higher than work function of the metal. Okay. This is more simplistic way of how these devices will work. So first thing, obviously, you apply a drain and source voltage and gate voltage also. So if gate voltage is 0, you see source and drain. In first one, nothing is happening. Second one, you see gate voltage is less than 0, means this whole organic semiconductors energy levels are pulled up because gate is less than 0. And then drain is less than 0, so drain is pulled up. And now you can say hole can be transported, which is for P channel from source to semiconductor. Similarly, for N channel, gate voltage is higher than 0. It means all the levels are pushed down. And then drain voltage is higher than 0. It means drain potential level is pushed down. And now you see from top of the source, electrons can transfer through the LUMO to the drain. And this is how this device will work. If you see the device characteristics, it matches more like a conventional MOSFET, and then you decide various regions and so on. But how do you calculate the mobility, field effect mobility? Now, field effect mobility, depending on whether linear or saturation region, you generally what you do, you take square root ID, del square root ID by del VGS, and that slope gives you the mobility. So there are some mathematical expressions which help you to get the mobility from linear and saturation. So this is called parameter extraction. So essentially you have a current equation. If your current follows your saturation current equation, you use it and find mobility as using this square root IDS, del square root IDS by del VGS, which gives you a straight line. And then you calculate the mobility, and then threshold voltage and all those things are calculated. If you directly have current values, then mobility can be just used in using formulas. And so there are methods. How do you calculate linear and saturation mobility? Sometimes these slopes can be different. And when slopes are different, you can overestimate or underestimate mobility. So you have to see which operating region you want to use. And accordingly, you have to tell what is the mobility achieved from your devices. Generally, these devices find, and what one issue is with organic transistors, where you get good P-type devices, but not good N-type devices. Why so? Because for N-type devices, you want your LUMO to be matching with metal work function. That is a requirement, and many times this N transport materials doesn't give you a good electronic structure for that. And if metals are used, such as lower function metals are used, they are oxidizing. So many times we don't get good N-type devices. If materials like gold are used, they are suitable for P-type device. But not for, so LUMO is somewhere around minus 2.5, HOMO is somewhere around 5. Metals like gold are 5, so it is a good P-type kind of conduction if you see these materials. But say something like 2 or 3, which is LUMO. Now you choose a metal which has work function of 2 or 3. In that case, that will be calcium. or aluminum sometimes. Calcium in inert ambient it can work, but the moment it comes in air, it will become black. Similarly, your aluminum oxidizes very quickly. N-channel devices are not. So most of the times they are single type of devices, P-type, and they are used in driver circuits. Here there are a couple of examples with low number of these. But these driver circuits are used in backplane of displays. Like OLED displays, which are already established as a technology. For each OLED pixel, you need some driver circuit. And there you want these organic transistors to fit in. But then, any transistor, if it is driving a OLED device, what are the primary requirements? Any display can be of two types. One is obviously dynamic display, other one is static display. For static display, you want your transistor to give the same current for longer time, for the amount of time your device, if it is half an hour, 1 hour, 10 days, so on. Your transistor's current, which is drain current, should not decay. Second thing is there is a dynamic display. Dynamic display means things are moving, things are changing. Transistor is switching on and off multiple times. In that case, your current should not change. So this is repeatability. First one is called bias stability. And obviously, with this, you want low voltage operation for low power, obviously. You want high mobility so that you get high current. And so these are essential: high mobility, low voltage operation, bias stability, repeatability. These are essential. Many times we talk about logic circuits. Now, logic circuits, you want CMOS kind of, where NMOS and PMOS. Now, what happens when good N-type devices are not there? Making NMOS is different. Many times people thought that, see, solution processing, you don't want to put two solutions one by one, because when you make one, other one becomes bad and so on. There was a exploration of these ambipolar materials, where the same material can work as an NP type both, and depending on what voltage polarity you apply. So that was also studied. So that is called ambipolar. That is for simplicity. So there are various approaches, and so we'll just have a brief break, and then we can continue. So till now, if there are any questions, I can take. Okay. So you may write in chat box.
Any participants have any questions, so they can write in chat box, or they can also ask.
Yes, Sugit. Yeah, please. No, if there are no questions, then I can continue the presentation. Not a problem. There was a question: is there any specific tool? So right now I'm talking about more of a fabrication. But tools, one of the slides I showed where one university has provided some tools where we can do simulation. So there are no specific tools as such for organic transistor simulation. That is the problem. People use existing. No. There are no such. See, the problem is because there is not a single material and dielectric combination. For silicon, we have mostly a few set of materials. All the models and material parameters are fixed. But here, every couple of years, you get a new, or not one new, many new materials. So that is the problem. There is no standard. Until industry takes it, there will not be any simulation tools. Industry has taken OLED, but that is more like direct production. And in circuits, it's not available. So it's in R&D stage. The question is, germanium may also be used. Okay, the circuit printed on screen, how the circuits will be printed? Okay. See, there were two questions. One was germanium. See, germanium is a semiconductor, and that is not used in this flexible electronics. Second question was, let me see. Second question is this circuit printed on is how these circuits will get power supply. Okay, very good. This is a good question. So one thing is you don't print on skin, but you have stretchable materials like PDMS, EcoFlex. So circuits will be printed on that EcoFlex or PDMS, and they will be pasted on the skin. Now, obviously, there has to be either a battery with the EcoFlex. When you wear, it's like you paste it and there has to be battery. Second thing is a large area of this printed has to be a supercapacitor or printed battery. So when you say this smart skin, in printing process itself, you have to have a supercapacitor or battery printed along with all the circuits. So that is called energy autonomous or self. So it can harvest energy. There can be small flexible energy harvester such as solar, or a battery itself which is printed, which can work for a bit longer. So those are the strategies. But then when you say you don't want battery, see, if you have seen, there are passive components. Now passive components like RFID antenna. Now RFID antenna, passive, see, all these signals obviously require battery, but then those kind of components can work on see, signal can be directly transferred, and this reflected and kind of read back by the reader. But then obviously when these systems will come, they have to have this printed supercapacitor and printed batteries. See, there are whenever people make these devices, like what we do, we don't do still stretchable, but generally what you do is you try to have a after making a device, you just keep bending both sides and see if there is a performance change. So that is called mechanical stability. Stretching is one thing. When you stretch, things will break. But even rolling thing, you just roll it some flexible like paper, and after that again you unroll it and characterize the device. If it works, you try it 10 times, 100 times. That is called flexibility. So if after flexibility your devices work, this whole phenomena is called electromechanical flexibility. So devices like bias stress stability you check, you also check electromechanical stability, where after bending your devices work. If after bending your device don't work, then you say you don't use it, and this is not electromechanically stable. There is one question: are perovskite based material tried in? See, one of the groups like this Nupur Matthews at this NTU Singapore, he has been working on this perovskite based materials, and see, there are research groups, and I have not followed his work, but certainly they are trying in many things. I'm not sure whether they are using for what component, but transistors based on this perovskite, people are trying. How easy is that fabrication? I'm not sure. Second question is, can microwave solid state circuits be replaced by such technology? Microwave, lot of reports I see, they are on flexible substrates, they are printable. But for example, see, I just talk about antennas where transponders, these chips cannot be done by flexible, they have to be procured and placed on flexible. But then overall other components which are larger antennas and those things can be, even some circuits can be printed. Those are the, so it has a scope of producing those also. Okay. So very good. We'll just continue to the next part. And again, we'll take questions in the, so I'll share my slide again. Okay. So coming on transistor itself, when you say design for high performance, what do you do? Obviously, we said that high mobility, low voltage operation, contact resistance, and these things will. But as a device engineer, when you say high mobility or low voltage operation, the first thing you see, why not have a high K gate dielectric material? But then people say high K gate dielectric material might have more bad interface and which can trap charges. So you say, can there be some buffer layer which is better for the charge transport and so on? Similarly, when you say source drain, once you put on the semiconductor, there will be a Schottky barrier. Can you reduce that Schottky barrier? So one can think, can there be a doping strategy to do that? One person can say that organic semiconductor itself are they degrade in ambient. Can something be done about that? You can say, okay, let's put some encapsulation, cover it from top, laminate it. That is called encapsulation. What is the way forward? When you see high mobility, now high mobility is combination of everything. So obviously you want to have new electron and hole transport materials which are having higher transport property, better transport properties. And then you have dielectric and interface engineering. Now what is dielectric and interface engineering? There are certain parameters called density of interface traps. Now when you make the devices and you characterize them, there is something called subthreshold slope or subthreshold swing. Now that gives you an first-hand idea of what is DIT. So if sharper the device, there is better interface. If the change is not sharp, it is not a good interface and so on. So you do contact engineering, you do dielectric interface engineering, you do overall design and encapsulation. And then fabrication on flexible substrate, and you also check electromechanical stability. All these things you see, and then you say good transistor. Our high performance transistor is fabricated. Now, contact resistance itself has various methods to characterize. There are 4 probe methods. But then one method which is more accepted is from transistors. And the effect of contact resistance here in this slide, if you see RS and RD are the Schottky barriers are contributing towards contact resistance, and you say RC is RS plus RD, and they give you injection barrier. And when you extract the mobility, that mobility is strongly dependent on channel length. And why channel length? Because contact resistance, if you see, if you scale the transistor smaller or larger, contact resistance will be same. So when you scale the transistor smaller, because contact resistance is not varying, it is same large. For a smaller transistor, it will impact more and your effective mobility will be much lesser. When transistor is very large, the channel resistance is itself is so high that contribution of contact resistance is much smaller, and you will see the close to real mobility. Okay, how do you calculate it? So when we say one part is constant, another part is varying. And we might have seen this line equation in our 10+2. There is an equation called y is equal to mx plus c. When one thing is constant and one thing is varying, and whatever thing is varying on a parameter x, and in this case we say channel length. So if you plot channel length and total resistance on resistance together and treat it as y is equal to mx plus c, then you can actually find out what will be C, because C is constant. Now in transistor, how do you find R on? So R on, you say for a particular VGS, particular gate voltage, now a fixed channel will be created. Now take drain to source voltage very small. Why drain to source voltage very small? Because then this transistor will be in the linear region. It will be more like a resistance, linear resistance. So you say R on is del VDS by del IDS at a particular gate to source voltage when drain to source voltage is very small. So that is R on. And now what is R on? R on is R channel, which is channel resistance, plus RC, which is source plus drain resistance. Okay, so R on is RCH plus RC. Now, R channel RC, let's see, this is a constant. So R channel, any resistance is rho L by A, resistivity into L by A. Now A is cross-section area. Now many times you don't know what is the thickness of these organic semiconductors. You plan for 100 nanometer, you get 150 nanometer. It means thickness is something you many times, the cross-section you many times you may not know. What you might know is from top you know what is the overall area, but cross-section you are not very sure. And in these type of semiconductors where you are not sure about thickness, there is an additional term which comes into picture, which is seat resistance. So you could have written Ron is rho L by A plus RC. Now L by A, you write L by W into T. W is width and T is thickness. So that will be cross section of this semiconductor channel. Now when you say T has come out and T you are not sure, now rho by T is something called seat resistance. Okay. So rho by T into L by W, which is RSH into L by W plus RC. Now what you see, W is in denominator and W is fixed. W is width, we are not changing. Okay. Width, if you change, resistance will be lower, simply, nothing else. Now you normalize this whole equation with width. It means Rn into W is equal to RSH L plus RCW. Now, since W is constant, RCW is also constant, and this looks like Y is equal to Mx plus C, where X is L, M is RSH, and R on W is Y. Okay. Now, why RCW is called width normalized contact resistance? Only because if you just increase the width by 2, RC will simply become RC by 2. So it means RCW will always be constant for a particular device. Okay. So this is the equation. Now what will you do? You make devices with various channel lengths, and for each channel length and for a particular gate voltage, obviously, you can find out R on W. And that R on W, the intercept at X is equal to 0 on Y axis will give you RCW. Okay. And that gives you how do you calculate RCW on each gate voltage. So each gate voltage you can plot RCW, and obviously you will see RCW will decrease with higher gate voltage, because higher gate voltage means more stronger channel and contact resistance will be lower and lower. And that is what was done. And this is again showing a strategy where contact resistance was reduced in transistors by doping this source and semiconductor interface by a new material, which we will not talk about. So this can be done, and in that case, maybe about 10 years ago, it was demonstrated that there is a way to reduce this contact resistance by suitable doping techniques. And if you see here, RCW is very high for reference devices, and in contact dop devices, it has become close to 0. The method which I showed is this, where you plot with L, which is your R on W, and the intercept what you get on Y is your contact resistance. Okay. Anyway, there were things like I mentioned, which is dielectric interface engineering. Dielectric interface engineering, where the interface or surface of dielectric you modify. There can be various weights. There can be self-assembled monodiars, or there can be thin layer of polymers itself. Now those thin layer of polymers can vary depending on whether you want to make P-channel device or whether you want to make N-channel device. Because see, each material there can be a better suitable buffer layer or interface layer. But many times these small things like OTS, octadecyl trichlorosilane or octyl trichlorosilane. Many times you say we did OTS treatment. But then even small changes like C8 and C18 can lead to differences in the performance. There were other things which were tried, like stacked structure could be done in these devices. So this is stacking, where solution process P and N channel devices were made. Again, these are the things which I was kind of involved in, that's why I saw. So inverters, like CMOS kind of inverters were demonstrated. This is one example where ambipolar devices are produced, and with ambipolar inverters are made. and obviously you get some gain and some kind of switching behavior. Generally, you fabricate these devices on rigid substrate to optimize to see whether devices are working. So this is one example where 3-volt operation was demonstrated long back, and you could see very good output and transfer characteristics by various high-K and SAM buffer layers. And as I said, this dielectric interface engineering OTS 8 and OTS 18, even small changes can lead to different performance and mobility numbers. But let us focus on one thing, which is rather than talking about various devices parameters. When you characterize a device, two things I said. One is bias stress stability, and another one is repeatability. Bias stress, where you constantly apply a voltage, gate and drain voltage on the device, and see how IDS changes. Repeatability is you keep characterizing the device multiple times and see how things are changing. So if you see first plot here, this is repeatability. You see multiple times and check if all the transfer curves are falling at the same line. So in this case, it was happening. Second is bias stress. And what you see is this is plot of normalized drain current, which is IDS T by IDS 0. So obviously at T is equal to 0, IDS T by IDS 0 will be 1. And with time, you see it is decaying. And it will, it is like 85%, then so it will go down with bias stress. Now, how do you characterize how much is acceptable? How much bias stress decay is acceptable? And later, not later in around say 2014 or so, what we thought is let's have a number, and that number, anything is like eventually say if you are glowing LED, and visibly what we can see is if LED is dim or brightened by 10%, we can still not notice. So in that case, say T 90%, where your current becomes 90% of actual value, T 10%, which is 10% reduced, can be a parameter. So we decided let's have a T 10%, where your current changes by 10%. And that can be a parameter. So with you stress the device, when your current tries to go below or higher plus minus 10%, then you say that now you can notice the change. And before that, it is acceptable. Okay, so this is called 10% decay lifetime, the time at which the drain currents decays by 10%. Is used as a parameter to compare for this work, which was done with various organic semiconductors that we will see. But then this bias stress, which is drain current decay, that happens due to threshold voltage instability. When you keep pushing this dielectric, there can be a threshold voltage instability that can be permanent or temporary. But then there was a model already with hydrogenated amorphous silicon, where you see this first one and given by Lipsch and Kanicki long back, I think in 90s, 93, where delta VTH, mod of delta VTH is dependent on 1 minus exponential minus T by tau beta. Now this is a stressed exponential function, where beta is stressed exponential factor, and then a lot of trap distribution and other physics come into picture. So it's not an exponential decay, but more stretched exponential decay. But what you see, the first term, which is VTH infinite by VTH 0, it means at infinite time, what will be your VTH minus at T is equal to 0, what was your VTH? Okay, this is the first parameter into this exponential term. Now in organic transistor, if you apply VGS at infinite time, VTH infinite will be VGS only. Your device will not work. This is what we think, that current will become 0 and your VTH becomes VGS, so that VGS minus VTH becomes 0 and your current becomes 0. Okay, that is the first assumption. And with that, what we thought, that drain current equation is IDS, saturation equation is IDS half mu Cox W by L, VGS minus VT square. And at infinite time, when VTH infinite becomes VGS, this current becomes 0. So that was a very good assumption which we did. And then we tried to take this delta VTH into account. So at t is equal to infinite, we already know. At t is equal to t, we have VTH, which is VTH 0 plus delta VTH. Okay. So that equation you have, and then you try to find IDS t by IDS 0. Very simple mathematics. Nobody has done it. We just tried. And with that, just kind of putting things, reanalyzing it, gave us this equation, which is IDS t by IDS 0 is exponential minus 2t by tau beta. Now, why this equation is important? Because when we characterize the devices, we always see this decay. But we cannot get each moment, we cannot get threshold voltage. But we always easily get this IDS t by IDS 0. Now, by appropriate fitting techniques, if you just fit this equation with that, the decay curve you get, you actually, because t is known, IDS t by IDS 0 is known, this tau and beta can be extracted. And when tau and beta can be extracted, you can again put back in the first equation, which is delta VTH t, you can plot. Okay, so this is a very good strategy to find out VTH instability in the transistors. But then should we worry about that much? Now it's more like your body, if you keep working, you are tired, and if you take some rest, many times the energy, you recover. But if you keep running for longer time, you are tired. But then this is more like devices are like that. If you just try to give rest to the devices for some time, and this plot again a random kind of plot. This is not published one, but here what we had seen is you characterize the device, bias stress device. So here you say 1 hour stress and 20-minute rest. And then what you see, with time there is a very minimal decay, but if you keep giving rest, devices are recovering back to its normal position. So this is a good sign. So most of the bias stress decay is recoverable, and it's not a permanent damage unless you actually leave it for infinite time. Okay. So this is something we need to study, but we need not worry about bias stress decay that much. The one device which I showed is flexible devices by our group with collaboration with Hagen Clark. This is the fabrication kind of procedure where you had a substrate, we had aluminum gate, we had a oxide by oxygen plasma. We did this self-assembled monolayer, then organic semiconductor, and not only one organic semiconductor. We tried at that time whatever were the best suitable or high performance organic semiconductors for vacuum evaporation. We tried all of them, and not only P, we tried N also. Everything was fabricated. And if you see, this is one of them is shown, which is the better one, which is DPH DNTT, output and transfer curve. You see -3 volt is operation. But then there were 3 more. Pentasyn is more routine one, which is being used. DNTT is again one which is reported heavily, and then additional modifications in that chemical, like organic semiconductor. And you see these good numbers. If you see sub-threshold swing millivolt per decade, these numbers are very good. And also you see current on-off ratios are like 10 to the power 6, 7, 8, and so on. And mobility is very high. So these are the devices which could be produced. But just to cut things short and see how do these devices stand in comparison to other thin film technologies. Again, when you compare something, you have to normalize. So one thing is, let's see 10% decay lifetime. The other one is channel seat resistance, because many times the semiconductor thickness is different. So you also find channel seat resistance, which takes care of your capacitance density and applied voltage both. So with R seat resistance, now on this plot, anything which has lower seat resistance will be better, and anything which has higher 10% decay lifetime will be better. Now you see this DPH DNTT are these organic semiconductors are better than amorphous silicon in many cases, and that too when they are produced at much lower temperature. So they are placing them very well in this comparison. and with numbers of mobility, which is 1 centimeter per volt second. So a lot of scope and potential is there in this technology for vacuum evaporated semiconductor. But then eventually one doesn't want vacuum evaporation to be conventional part of flexible electronics. It's more like printing has to be there, and for printing, you want solution process materials. So here we are talking about pentacene, but then there was a form of pentacene where you see the center is this 5 benzene rings are nothing but pentacene, and then 2 additional these branches are making it TIPS pentacene, which is soluble. We explored this material a lot, worked on this on various aspects. And why did we work on this material? As device engineer, you don't go and make materials, but we just try to choose whatever best is available in the market and try to optimize. That's what we did as a device group. And we started with seeing what kind of solutions will be suitable. Then also we started seeing what kind of other strategies will be used for making these better devices. And all those things we did, we kept producing devices. There was a kind of polymer blend solution. We are mixing semiconductor in polymer, and then performance was increased and all those things. We studied this bias. So we optimized on various aspects for this semiconductor. And eventually we also started fabricating these devices on flexible with 2 strategies in laboratory. Obviously, we don't have printing and other facilities, but whatever best could be done, there was one ITO coated PET substrate, and other one is with hafnium oxide was done by ALD, but one dielectric was PVP, and other dielectric was where TIPS pentacene was mixed in a material which is PS, polystyrene, that is also a dielectric, and that is naturally phase separated. Both kind of devices were compared, and one of them we found better. We also studied mechanical stability, electromechanical stability. Initially, what is the simplest way? You just, if you want to bend it at capital R, which is bending radius, that you can have a cylinder with that radius and just paste your devices there. And then after that, you see what is the deterioration in the performance, what is density of interface trap change, and all those things we did extensively. And so various things we did, and eventually we were able to fabricate devices which were working decently at 5 volt operation. Very nice output and transfer curves. You can see mobility going up to about 1 centimeter per volt second, high on-off ratio. So nice devices we could fabricate with this vertical phase separation and using polystyrene blend. And not only device operation, we did this electromechanical studies where not only the cylinder method, but we tried both ways, you can say stress and strain both we applied on these devices. And then devices were working fine. We also tried with some sensing, optical sensing ways, and they had worked well. So you see some optical sensing kind of, or as photo sensing devices we tried. And this is what you see, transient photo response. So they were very useful. So all these possible transistor and sensing applications we tried. Next thing was when you say TIPS pentacene and polystyrene blend, again that ratio itself was important. We did those studies also where which ratio was suitable for device fabrication. Those things we did. Now coming towards biodegradability or other unconventional substrate. So one thing was best suitable or available substrate was paper, which could, once you fabricate something on paper, it is naturally biodegradable. So we tried fabricating devices on paper. They worked well at 10 volt. And high electrical and mechanical stability was kind of achieved. And with temperature, obviously more than 60, there were some deterioration, but then before that it was working fine. And moreover, this was having long-term air stability, more than 6 months. We could see devices, the performance was not degrading as such. And then we tried some other things also, see what was effect of UV exposure. So we did it, and some circuit characteristics also I have not shown, but all those things on devices on paper, we made inverter, we made everything, and that was working fine. Second one was devices on unconventional substrate like Kapton tape and so on, that we also tried with similar technologies. So all these device related characteristics we did, inverters were working fine. So this is what we did. Various unconventional substrates using or even biodegradable substrates were tried. Finally, we also thought of changing some other components, such as say dielectric itself. And moreover, not any hazardous material, some natural materials. Like gelatin is again a natural protein. And that can be used as sensing component also. So we made those devices with biodegradable gelatin, and biodegradable gelatin dielectric devices worked well. Some characteristics you see with capacitor characteristics and also device characteristics, they worked well. Moreover, they also gave very interesting result on real-time breath sensing. So if a person just tries to breathe in front of those devices while characterization, you can actually see this frequency of breath you can characterize in real time, apart from your circuits and other performance. So this was a good kind of study where these devices with biodegradable gelatin were used as a kind of real-time breath analyzer. Obviously, this work was not could not be done in detail because of COVID lockdown and other things after that. But this is a very interesting result, and this finds applications in various other things like health monitoring applications. When you have these organic transistors, and I'm talking about breath, which is the easiest thing to do, but there could be other cardiovascular and other things which can be tried, and this can be used in health monitoring. But then, see, it's not about only making a device and using it. This whole ecosystem of this green electronics has to be evolved. And now, what is this whole ecosystem, you say? One thing you have to see what applications we are trying to do this, because unless you show some applications, nobody will be interested in your technology. So something we said electronic skin or smart textile. So these are subsystems. But for any subsystems, you have to talk about devices, which devices we are fabricating. Okay. Then whether it is economical, whatever you produce, where either you do it through some intellectual properties or some products and whatever, but it has to be economically viable. So these are one side of this wheel, where economy, applications, and which devices you are using. Other side is how do you make it? So certainly you need organic polymers, you need biodegradable materials, you need conducting inks. What you do at academia, you do research, you use unconventional substrate, you design, you sometimes synthesize the materials, publish papers. This is our role, buy materials, develop this technology. So this whole thing, and not only it's making devices or showing applications and economy, but then in academia, there has to be a right way of doing education, training, R&D, innovation and incubation, if not only this technology, any of this technology. Because see, conventional VLSI, you have a lot of MTech programs and everything is well established. But any new technology which is being developed, unless academia adopts it, like people like me are doing research, but doing research means you produce some PhDs, you maybe do some small effort. So this has to be again way of thinking in academia, and more people need to work in those technologies who are interested. So this and there is never late. So I always say this is a right time to harness the potential of this. Obviously, if you do any of these things out of the way, slightly different, you get some appreciation, and the same happens with our group, which I think last year we got a lot of recognition in this related to this work, and also appreciated by HRD minister and a lot of newspapers and so on. This group was, so though this is a group which is more like doesn't want to be in limelight, but somehow naturally it happened where some of our work was appreciated, and this gives you happiness when you do something like that. One component, so I spoke about transistors and sensors, but then one small part which we didn't, and I have not, I don't have the recent result right now in these slides, but then talking about memory technology. So sensing you do, transistor action you do, but storage, if you see, conventional SRAM and other things might not be suitable for this electronics when transistors itself are very large. So what are other emerging memory technologies? So overall, not about flexible or any other technology. If you see emerging memory technology, resistive random access memories are one. Why they are one? Because they are the simplest possible structures. These are more like a capacitor where two electrode and you have a metal which can change its property. And the same conducting bridge RAM, CB RAM is nothing but RRAM itself. Then PCM is phase change memory. Then STT magnetic RAM is there, then NAND flash. These are the smaller memories. When you compare these, RRAM finds at least more potential to be best among these. If you talk about feature size, there are sizes which are in few nanometers because this is a capacitor are produced. And in that case, the density becomes much higher, and all those properties RRAM has better. It's not about flexible RRAM which we fabricate, but in general RRAM is an area which has good applications. And what are these? So first is scalability is very good. So this is a future technology where it can be density can be high. And moreover, it is compatible to conventional CMOS because the dielectrics which can be used by CMOS. So it is easy to fabricate. It can give high speed operation, low power, and then reliability. So all these advantages are there, which make this a good choice for conventional CMOS technology also, but flexible also because this is simple structure can be tried. Now, how do these devices work? Mostly, it's like when you say resistive random access memory, it means register is there. Now, this register, depending on how do you characterize this resistance change. So there can be two resistance states. One is called low resistance state, another one is called high resistance state. Okay. So one of them you say is storing memory, other one is normal one. So HRS and LRS are two resistance state, and obviously there can be a set and reset voltage, or set and reset current, or set and reset process. So you set it to 1 or you set it to 0. So one of them you call it 1, one resistance state you call it 1, another resistance state you call it 0, and you can switch it between 2, and that is switching. So this is resistive random access memory. In both directions you say that is bipolar switching. In only one side you see that is unipolar switching. But structure is very simple. There is a top electrode, there is a dielectric, and there is a bottom electrode. And obviously this whole structure has to be there on the substrate. Some of these results, I think 2018, this was we had done. This is again a PVP, AG, and HFO2. Obviously HFO2 is a good dielectric, PVP is a polymer dielectric, adding flexibility, and ITO AGR electrode. So this was studied by us in 2018. And then later, because of flexibility and other stability, you had to enhance, and we tried exploring many other things where graphene oxide came to us. Like it was a material which could enhance the performance of these transistors. We tried, and so enhanced flexibility and other things was achieved, which was done by adding this graphene oxide and PVP together. So these were things which we did, and a lot of studies were done for this resistive random access. We fabricated these RRAM devices, did bending cycles and so on. And this is again work in progress. We don't say that these are the best devices which could be produced, but then a lot of decent devices with repeatability higher than 1000 and so on have been already produced. This RRAM is, the problem is many of the RRAM devices which people make in few cycles, they die out. So that is the problem. So we are working on that also. So with this, I would like to open the floor for more discussion, and I'll summarize my talk, which is, in summary, I can say that not specifically about resistive RAMs, but I'll say transistors, high performance transistors were demonstrated, and with excellent characteristics. And suitable modeling, simulation, and design strategies are needed, obviously. But then optimization techniques will be required to get good devices, and that's what it was shown. Devices can be produced on unconventional substrate, like one I showed, which were on this Kapton tape, which is polyamide essentially, and paper also, and they all were working very well. Biodegradable materials like gelatin were used, and with gelatin, any natural material. And right now it's about gelatin and other, but I think recently I'm seeing these papers which are sweet electronics. So many of these electronics which can be edible also. So you don't throw it, you eat it and digest it. So there are areas, interesting areas which can be taken further. But then obviously health monitoring and biomedical applications, one of the very crucial applications where this flexible electronics can find its place. And I have to acknowledge the PhD students, obviously Vivek Raghuvanshi, Ishan Varun, Ajay Mato. Ishan, Vivek, and Ajay just graduated, and Deepak had already graduated. And so these, I want to acknowledge this whole group and some of the funding agencies and IIT Jodhpur. So with this, I thank you all for patiently listening to me. And we can have more discussions now.
Thank you, sir. If any participants have any questions, so they can ask now. You can write in chat box also. Sir, I think participant doesn't have any.
No, that's okay. That's okay. So in that case, yeah, we can discuss a bit and then.
Okay, so now I will conclude this session here. Thank you, sir, for such a nice and very informative talk on high performance organic transistor and memory for flexible electronics application. The major key talk is starting from the evaluation of device technology, IC technology. You have introduces what is the flexible electronics, motivation of this advantages, and which are also called as a green electronics. So you have discussed various application of the various electronics, flexible electronics and printed electronics, and you have also shown the major device for this flexible electronics as a organic transistor, is construction, printing, and patterning process as additive, which are also called as a additive process, printing and patterning process. Possibility of 3D printing you have discussed, talked about the organic electronics, organic thin film transistor, its structure, basic fundamental operation, parameter extraction, and its circuit application. And you have also discussed how we can design a high performance transistor and its challenges. What are the challenges involved with this? Also, the operational stability of devices such and the repeatability and the bias stress in terms of the operation stability and devices of the devices. These are the key factors. Electrical stability and results of you have also shown your results of your work by done by your group, and you have also discussed the various emerging memory technology. So I think definitely participant will get benefited from this talk, and this will be helpful for the participant for their understanding about the flexible electronics, and for those who wants to work on this area, so this will be very helpful for them. So thank you, sir, for this sharing your expertise with us. Thank you very much, sir. So now we can stop this session here, and again we will meet on 1 p.m. Sorry, 3 p.m. At day 3, second session. Sir, are you sharing the link of this feedback here?
Yes, sir. I'll just share it. I'll just share it.
So we are sharing the link of this today's feedback. So you can fill this feedback form. We have already shared the feedback link of yesterday afternoon program in your mail. Okay, mail ID. So you can see there. Now,